Everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining our webinar today on stakeholder and energy sector coordination. Really excited to have you here. I'm Gretchen Gigley. I'm program manager at the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, SEIA. For those of you who aren't familiar with SEIA, we're a nonprofit organization based in Atlanta, Georgia. We started in 2006. We're part of a network of 6 energy efficiency organizations across the country. We serve 12 southeastern states and are really focused on promoting energy efficiency as a catalyst for economic development, for workforce development, and for energy security across the region. So we work a lot with researchers and provide consultation and stakeholder facilitation to all those working in the energy sector. And we're really excited to be here today with our BRESE initiative. Before I jump in and give a little bit of background on BRESE, I wanted to review some housekeeping notes here. Q&A, we're asking folks to put their questions in the chat as opposed to the Q&A. So go ahead and keep the questions coming in the chat. Please make sure your setting is set to everyone so that we can everyone can see what you're asking, and also most importantly, you can connect to one another. So we want to hear where you're from, and if there are folks on the call that you want to connect with, you can use the chat that way. But this is really about creating that connectivity with those of us working in the energy sector. So questions in the chat, and you can ask questions throughout. We'll have 5 minutes of Q&A after each speaker, and then at the end, if there's time, we'll have additional Q&A for the session. We are recording this session, and we'll share the recording in an email. We'll share a recording. Actually, the recordings will go on the BRESE website, but we'll share an email with you afterwards with a link to that. So you'll have access to it and can share this great information out with your colleagues. And then we are doing a couple different polls, which Sammy, if I have my partner in crime here, Samantha, who's going to be monitoring the chat and facilitating our polls. So please, respond to these polls. We want to hear a little bit more about you, where you're working, where you're seeing the gaps in needs. So we'll be asking some of those questions during this webinar, and then we'll also have a survey that we'll send out afterwards, and I'll talk more about that at the end of the webinar. We have a great lineup for you today. We have Ruth Yao from the Georgia Institute of Technology. We have Caitlin Rose, who's the Policy Director for Southeast Sustainability Directors Network, and Ashley Perez, who's the Sustainability Project Manager at the Office of Sustainability and Resilience with the City of Orlando. So BRESE, what is BRESE? BRESE is building a resilient and efficient Southeast. That's a new acronym, perhaps, to add to your sea of acronyms. But this is an initiative that started in 2025 with support from the U.S. Department of Energy. And it really came about as a regional effort to support 11 southeastern states, focused on connecting stakeholders. So folks like you on this call, and these working groups are really a core piece of the BRESE collaborative. So connecting stakeholders with tools and resources, engaging in partnerships to support energy code implementation and best practices. So this is a 3-year initiative, and it really is about partnerships. We have a great team of folks. Like I mentioned, U.S. Department of Energy is a funder and core partner in this work. We also partner with Southeast Sustainability Directors Network, and GreenLink Analytics to roll out some of these resources. We have a website that has case studies. This is where we'll put our webinars and manage our working groups. So I'll be throwing some QR codes at you throughout the presentation to be able to, here's your first one, to be able to jump on and get more information that we're sharing through BRESE. I did want to mention that we have an RFI that is out right now. We had just extended the deadline because we'd like to hear from as many people as possible. This is to help us learn more about how we need to direct funding, where and how we need to direct funding to help move the needle in the energy code built environment space. So this particular RFI is asking about, project ideas around energy affordability, building energy code guidance, implementation, workforce. But we really are prioritizing apprenticeship programs so they can be new or existing. So how are you moving the needle on those first four bullets there? But within, the mechanism being an apprenticeship program, new or expansion of an existing. The deadline is the end of June, and we'd love to hear from you. So first QR code will take you to more detail on the RFI. And if you have questions, please let us know. There's a contact information on that site. Okay, drum roll. Sammy, how did the poll
Yeah, so we had about
resolve?
50% of the room say Georgia, that they work, live, or see a really great need there. And then we had Florida and North Carolina and South Carolina come up. And then there was mentions of North regions, Virginia, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Alabama. So we have a pretty diverse group here. So of areas where you're working and seeing a need for this. Okay.
Great. Yeah, this may be our most diverse audience regionally, right? Or like geographically. All right, awesome. Well, I'm going to stop sharing it because I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and we're going to dive into the core content of the webinar. First up, we have Ruthie Yao from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Dr. Yao serves as the Center for Sustainability Communities Research and Education's Associate Director and holds a courtesy appointment in the School of History and Sociology. At Georgia Tech, she focuses on cultivating strong community partnerships and supporting a vision of sustainability education and community engaged research that centers equity and justice. We're so thrilled to have you here today, Ruthie. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. Good morning, everybody. This is so fun. I know some of the folks who are here to participate and love your work, and I'm so glad that we get to be in the room together. Thank you, Sia, for convening us. As Gretchen said, I'm going to give the first presentation. It's a little bit interactive at the jump. So I'm going to ask y'all, after I share my slides, I'm not going to ask you to psychically intuit what to respond to. But I'm going to ask you to put some words in the chat. How's that? Can y'all see anything? Wonderful. Thanks. I'm getting a nod from. Okay. I'm going to ask y'all to put some words in the chat. We're working on working together to do a little bit of thinking around the framework called asset-based community development. If you're familiar with this, then that's wonderful. Thank you for what I know you'll add when we do our Q&A in 15 minutes. If you're not familiar, then great. I'm so happy to bring this framework to you and hear what you think about it and its applicability in your spaces. So I'm going to ask for folks to put a descriptor in the chat. What is the word or the phrase that comes to mind when you look at this photo? What word or phrase is first popping into your mind for this photo? Samantha, we got anything?
Nothing yet.
Oh, don't be shy, y'all. There's no wrong answer, just a descriptor, adjective, adjective, noun, phrase. Return to eighth
Oh,
grade grammar.
I I got a few. I
Okay.
see dusty, dry, community art, creative, art, vision,
Okay, great.
hard.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And how about
Uh,
this one?
reclamation also came for the last one.
Okay. A descriptor, a word, or a phrase for this photo.
I see sad times two.
Mm-hmm.
I see clean up, neglected, ignored,
Mm-hmm.
neglected, litter, pollution, +1 to sad.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Samantha. Um, you all are stellar participants, and happily throwing a little bit of a wrench in the works for the first image. I love that, though. Um, if you're familiar with this framework, then you see these questions coming. But um, what we often go into a new setting or even a community that we know well, we often can go into that setting or that community with a what is missing mindset, a what is the problem that I can solve mindset. I tell you what, the sustainability sector, we are a sector full of problem solvers, which is a beautiful thing. Um, but often, if we have that frame of mind or that sort of perception set for ourselves, then we ask what is missing or what is wrong rather than what is present and what is right in a community. And I would love to hear in the chat one more time. So thank you so much, Samantha. I would love to hear, is there a sector that you know about or work in that you feel like is shaped strongly by public perceptions of what is wrong or missing rather than what is right and already present? The sector that I sort of come from my scholarship, is education. That's an example I would give, where it is shaped strongly by the public perception of failure or lack in public education. So that's my example. But is there a sector that you work in or an area that you know about that you feel like is shaped by this needs approach or this approach of a problem?
I think people are taking a sec to simmer. Oh, I see urban forestry come up.
Oh, okay. I would love to hear a word about that. If the person who's willing to, who put that in is willing to come off mute and say something, that'd be wonderful. You don't have to, but it'd be great to hear more. Urban forestry.
Catherine, would you like to? You can say no too. If you want to come off mute, I've invited you.
Hey everyone. Thank you for unmuting me.
Hey, Catherine.
Urban forestry is very interesting because everybody has an opinion about trees. There's like never enough trees until someone wants to develop something. It's if you want to start a riot in a local government, talk about updating the tree ordinance. That's like your best bet.
Catherine, that's great. Thank you. And it is so true, right? That in some ways, especially in our spaces, there's a devil's bargain being struck. What is present can be as problematic as what is absent, and sometimes they're the same thing. So, Catherine, thank you. So, uh, what this framework brings to us is sort of the super simplistic metaphor that we're familiar with, which is this cup half full metaphor. And everybody at some point by a teacher or a mentor or camp counselor has been told, why do you have such a glass half empty perspective? Why can't you take a more positive glass half full um, perspective? So ABCD or asset-based community development is premised on this idea that usually the glass half empty is the perspective with which we enter communities, being the metaphor, right, offering that people in communities have deficits and needs rather than that individuals and communities have assets and capacities. So to say about that sunlit lot that it is dusty or that it is empty or that it is dry is very different than saying it has been reclaimed or it is a place of creativity, right? So you all really offered those starkly, those two perceptions. Now, with the creek with the shopping carts in it, there was a pretty strong reaction to that, right? As being a site with needs that would require reclamation and cleanup. And what we would say in ABCD is that, of course, forgive me all, that of course this site is also a site of possibility, that what is present is also a creek and tree life and a grassy bank. So there's a lot present for a new life to come to this site, right? Or there is probably life happening at this site that is outside the frame. It may be that, right, people recreate on that grassy bank, or that there is, in fact, room for some recreation to happen adjacent to that parking area up at the top. But this entire framework is about our examination of our own perceptions. And often our perceptions are about needs. So the other tool that we use in asset-based community development, which was initiated by and developed by two academics based in Chicago in the 1960s who were doing civil rights advocacy and community work on the South Side. Right, they developed this framework out of the idea that needs and portraits like this one of a neighborhood characterized solely by what was wrong or overwhelming information about what was present and what was rich and what was abundant. So a neighborhood's needs map was and is actually a needs map, and needs mapping is a very typical way that we go about analysis when one is developing even stakeholder engagement and an analysis for a project. So the distinction in ABCD is that a needs approach produces particular outcomes and biases. So those include, as y'all can see, that residents internalize a label like we are deficient, local relationships are damaged, money comes into communities for very narrowly defined programs, and failure is rewarded and residents become dependent on systems. There's the other side of the coin of empowerment we know is disempowerment. And often in a needs approach, residents are receivers, right, rather than actors or agents. Of course, we can imagine that the other side of the needs map, but if we flip that map over, we can produce an asset map. And everyone on this call can imagine the asset map they would produce of their own home places, the places that you love, that define perhaps your childhood or adolescence or your adult life, your libraries, performance spaces, green spaces, creeks that you love or that your children love. So community asset maps reframe entirely how we understand a community and the way in which we go to a community seeking partnership. You can imagine, based on what I was sharing about a needs approach, that an asset approach produces very different orientations. An emphasis on associations, that is, groups that fundamentally are defined by the fact that no one is paid, rather volunteer-based, incentivized by personal passion, right? Focus on empowerment and relationships. And then the right needs emphasis focuses rather on people rather than networks of people, and services rather than that kind of co-creative internalized work of building on what is already present. And the credentials and clients really is tough for us, I think, in the spaces that we work in. We're very credential focused. I certainly am. So this is always an interesting side of tension for those of us who work at institutions or in the nonprofit space and are really dedicated to authentic partnership, but also are working in spaces that are defined by whether or not we are credentialed appropriately. And these principles, I hope, feel intuitive based on what I've already shared, but really fundamentally, ABCD is focused on engaging gifts from marginalized people and groups. Successful neighborhood action is the result of assets being identified and mobilized. ABCD builds relationships among community members that are mutually supportive. It aims to give community members stronger roles in local social change work. And that is what makes the change stick. There must be connectors that do this work. And you all on this call are all fundamentally connectors. You wouldn't be in the roles that you're in. You wouldn't be doing the work you do if you weren't a connector. And there have been connectors in your lives, no doubt, who have brought you into your work and who have expanded your networks, made your spaces richer with knowledge and experience. And then, oh dear, I'm sorry about the lack of graphic there. But foundational assets in ABCD are not tiny triangles with exclamation points, but rather individuals, associations, and institutions. That is where the power, that's where change is generated in asset-based approaches. Individuals' gifts, their talents, their passions, and their hopes. So individuals are the locus of ABCD activity. And then associations, as we said, are the ways that people come together to, out of their own passion, their own engagement and knowledge, make change in their communities. And institutions, of course, play a really particular and powerful role in ABCD. The difference is they aren't the primary actors. They are the ways that individuals or associations can co-create products or plans or projects, and the ways that resources can be more equitably diffused. So I always love to share some ABCD resources if it's interesting, folks. If you're familiar with ABCD already, then you may know some of these videos or some of these uh, texts. The fundamental text is called the Green Book. It is John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann's original text outlining their founding of ABCD and its principles. And I don't think the Green Book is on this slide, but anyway, I can put a link to it in the chat too. I'm excited to hear your thoughts and questions if you have any. If you're someone who's used ABCD or you use it in your work all the time, it would be so neat to hear you come off mute and talk about that. If there's something about the framework that rubs you the wrong way, I'd love to hear that. So any reactions, this is often a framework that does elicit responses and reactions from folks, either who've used it or who feel like, well, this is great, but it's all pie in the sky. Good for you, Ruthie. Go into a community all, poly positive. Tell me how it goes. I'm working on real problems. So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so folks, please go ahead, make a note in the chat if you want to come off mute or put a question in the chat. I do have one question for you, Ruthie, while folks are simmering and putting their thoughts together. But we're curious to see what you think is a primary barrier to authentic stakeholders engagement, and where is the greatest opportunity for those of us working in the built environment sector?
Yeah, I guess that presentation was my spoiler, but I do think that frameworks that emphasize the strengths in communities and the gifts in communities are the secret sauce for stakeholder engagement. My mentor always says, if you go into a community and you say, hi, I'm Ruthie, and I've noticed, how blighted and violent and horrible this neighborhood is. How can I help you? Really different than going into a community and saying, I've noticed how incredible the community art is here. Can you tell me a story about the community art? And I think in all of our work, the barrier is, especially in climate work and in sustainability work, to pretend that there aren't profound problems and challenges is not just inappropriate, it's insulting to community members. But to foreground problems can be similarly insulting, because often communities have been doing a ton of work And so to not only acknowledge that work, but to learn more about it and to learn how to build on it for me is the way through. The built environment's a beautifully like visual metaphor in a lot of ways because you can see what work communities have done, often in very obvious ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the two images you shared because I know the first one, a lot of people in the room were already like, art. They were
Yeah.
seeing that like
Yeah.
big factor. And then in the other image with the shopping carts, like you pointed out all those other factors there that were really beautiful parts that were being missed. But I'm wondering, could you also maybe share a bit like of a case study of where like you've applied this and really helped folks to see those differences?
Yeah, I mean, one of the places where ABCD is alive most visibly is Detroit. I bet y'all can immediately imagine why that would be. Speaking of reclamation and art, there are some amazing ABCD practitioners in Detroit, but also Detroit was a space, right, where enormous sort of possibilities emerged after the divestment, the crash, and sort of this kind of mass abandonment, right? I think there was more vacant property in Detroit than in any other city ever. And so if you search Detroit, particularly the work of Grace Lee Boggs, then you'll see a ton of community organizing around public spaces, around community gardens, but not just gardens, also youth empowerment and engagement, and the reclamation of public spaces around community priorities. So I really recommend the work of Grace Lee Boggs and the sort of built environment work that her associates were doing. She died at the age of 100 a few years ago, but her legacy lives large in Detroit. And there's really beautiful, a couple of beautiful documentaries and some great, for built environment folks, some really neat case studies that are immediately available. Yeah. Thanks, Samantha. That's a great question.
Yeah, no, thank you for giving more insight. And Detroit, as soon as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
Um, think so. I think people are still simmering right now. If you come up with questions, please put them in the chat. Let us know. I'll make sure that they get to Ruthie and folks. I know it's also Friday and it's the morning, but please think of those questions and we will make sure that they get answered for you. Ruthie, thank you so much for sharing ABCD with us and getting us going this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruthie. And we will share some of these resources on the BRESE website too. So I'll get with you to make sure folks have access to the list of resources that you shared in your presentation, and then some of the ones that you've referenced that were that you recommended in the discussion. And then again, this recording will be on the BRESE website, so you can reference all the great information Ruthie shared too. Really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise and kicking us off with really bringing home how important, this strategic collaboration is to any of the work that we're doing, and methodology, proven methodologies to help us do that. So really appreciate that. I'm gonna pass it off to Caitlin Rose next. Caitlin is the policy director for the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network, where she advances state policy priorities, strengthens member resources, and fosters regional partnerships across the Southeast. With a background in environmental science, atmospheric chemistry, and public health, she brings an interdisciplinary approach to sustainability and local climate action. Prior to SSDN, she worked with the Triangle J Council of Governments and the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, contributing to clean transportation initiatives and the development of the NC North Carolina Clean Energy Plan. Welcome, Caitlin. So happy to have you here this morning.
Appreciate that intro. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Just one second. Okay. Great. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and engaging in conversation with you all. And Ruthie, really appreciate you teeing us up to think about collaborative engagement from a variety of different perspectives. I'm going to shift our focus to a completely different topic, which is state energy policy and utility regulation. My goal today is to make that really, really boring topic really exciting for all of you. So if by the end of this presentation, you're even marginally more interested and excited about state policy engagement, I will have done my job. So as Gretchen said, I am the director of SSDN's state policy program. Our goal is to equip local governments with the knowledge, capacity, and tools to engage with state policy processes that influence their ability to meet their climate and energy goals that they have set locally. So we recognize that many local governments have emission reduction goals, energy conservation goals, building decarbonization goals, a variety of efforts underway to try to reduce their emissions and promote decarbonization throughout their broader communities. And there's pretty major barriers to local governments in the Southeast achieving those goals. Chiefly among those are state energy policy barriers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how state energy policy works and what local governments can do to get involved and engaged with those processes. So first off, I just want to set the framework for when I say state energy policy, what am I talking about? Recognizing that that varies state by state and really by context. So one state to the next in our southeastern region, state energy policy is not equivalent across state boundaries. Each state has its own utility context as well. Here in the Southeast, we don't have a regional transmission organization or an RTO where utilities are collaborating across jurisdictional boundaries. So we're really talking about monopoly or integrated monopoly utilities on a state-by-state context. So that really influences state energy policy. But at a high level, I'm talking about top-down policies that regulate what local governments and utilities can and cannot do to advance renewable energy and energy efficiency and other energy-related goals locally and within their jurisdictional boundaries. Oftentimes state-level policies, especially here in the Southeast, if you were on the webinar yesterday, you heard me talk a little bit about Dillon rule versus home rule states and local constraints on our state-level constraints on local government authority. Oftentimes, state energy policy also influences what local governments can and cannot do to achieve their greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, efforts to address energy burden, and advance energy efficiency in their communities. And these policies are often a long-term vision for how energy will be generated, transmitted, distributed, and consumed by end users, which could be individuals or commercial industrial customers. And they also set out rules to achieve that long-term vision. So whenever I'm saying state energy policy, that's kind of what I'm talking about. There's a couple different levels of policy making that exist. We've got stuff happening at the federal level. If you've ever paid attention to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, that's the big regulatory body that regulates electric generation and transmission at the federal level. We also have regulations that are set by federal agencies like the Department of Energy or the Environmental Protection Agency. And we also have things like federal grants, which many local governments apply for, as well as tax incentives for things like renewable energy, EV charging, and things like that. We also have things happening at the state level. It's a variety of examples I've listed here. Things related to renewable portfolio standards, which set forth goals for state-based utilities to hit certain renewable targets in their generation planning. Integrated resource plans, I'm going to be talking a lot about that today, but that is a utility's 15 to 20-year vision for how they're going to meet energy load and energy needs in their jurisdiction. So what are they going to build to meet the energy need that they're seeing within their balancing territory? We also have more direct customer programs, so things like community solar, community choice aggregation. Those exist or don't exist in various forms across the Southeast, and that is very utility dependent. So you're not going to see the same version of those things state by state. And then there's lots of things happening at the local level. So things that you all as local governments can control within your within your authority. Things like building and transportation codes. If you were here yesterday, you'll recall that building code authority is pretty state dependent. Some states, local governments do have the authority to adopt codes that are more strict than the states. You also have the authority related to zoning, permitting, and things like that fall within the local jurisdictional authority, as well as clean energy plans and other municipal incentives for decarbonization. So just wanted to give that broad context. Obviously, today we're going to be talking specifically about things happening at the state level. And that involves three different, I'm going to sort of simplify this to three different venues. So state legislatures, state regulators, and electric utilities. So the state legislature or General Assembly, depending on what yours is called in your state context, sets forth statutes that often require regulatory action related to energy generation and utility activities. So that regulatory body, it's called different things depending on where you're at, but if you have heard of the body called the Public Service Commission, the State Corporation Commission, the Utilities Commission, they have different names. I'm going to refer to them as Public Utilities Commissions for the purposes of this presentation, but just know that there's a variety of different names that those are referred to in different states. So state legislatures direct public utilities commissions to do certain things related to energy generation, distribution, and consumption. And that directly involves the electric utilities. So here in the Southeast, we have investor-owned utilities that are regulated by these public utilities commissions. The regulator or the Utilities Commission regulates that electric utility through docketed proceedings. So they're semi-judicial proceedings. Don't worry if you're like, what are you talking about? I will simplify that for you in just a little bit, but it is a pretty historically opaque process. What happens at utilities commissions between the regulator and the utility. It's a pretty technical, wonky topic that I hope to demystify a little bit for you today. And you might be thinking, well, why should we care? We're local governments. We don't need to pay attention to what's happening with state regulators, public utilities commissions. And I would assert that actually this is really critical to your ability as a local government to meet or not meet your climate and emission reductions goals. So as a utility customer of a regulated monopoly, oftentimes you don't have the choice of a different energy service provider. You kind of have to buy your power from the incumbent electric utility. So if your utility is not decarbonizing on a pace to meet the goals you've set, you're probably not going to be able to meet those goals either. So it's really important for stakeholders to get involved in Public Service Commission or Utility Commission proceedings related to long-term utility planning, because the things that utilities decide to build will directly impact the ability of you all as governments to meet your emission reduction goals and sort of tangentially for your community to meet its community-wide goals related to energy conservation, energy efficiency, and emission reduction. And I would say too, local governments have historically not been involved in these or have not been able to be involved in these proceedings. As I said, it's a pretty opaque process, but I would say you all as local governments are direct utility customers. You are large energy users and as well as large fleet operators. And I know many of you on the call have, in addition to emission reduction goals, you have goals to decarbonize and electrify your fleet as well, which will require, more advanced planning with your utility as you're thinking about installing EV charging and equipping your community to handle that new electric load. And you're also community stewards. So you are responsible for using taxpayer dollars efficiently and effectively to implement these programs. And you're also responsible for taking stock of what your community needs and what the critical gaps are for community services locally. So you're paying attention to not only efficient use of funds, but also what are the on-the-ground needs that the members of your community are facing and the asks that they have to you all as their government to provide better services. So you have a pretty unique stakeholder position that's different from a corporate customer or an industrial customer, and it's also really different from an environmental advocate because you have that direct place-based on-the-ground touch point with your community that an environmental group or a business customer is not going to have in the same way. And so I will say too, there's a variety of ways to get involved. So I mentioned that Public Service Commission or Utility Commission proceedings are pseudo-judicial, semi-judicial proceedings. That might be pretty scary to think about getting involved in something like that. And I want to assert that there's a variety of different ways that you can get involved. So I'm going to start from the top here, and I will say this list kind of goes from the top down in order of biggest investment in terms of time, expertise, and potentially cost to the least lowest barrier for entry at the bottom of this list. So there's what's called direct or formal intervention. That involves having an attorney where you can get formally involved in a case like an integrated resource plan or a rate case if you're concerned about energy affordability. Rate cases are how utilities set their prices. So what you as customers pay on your bills is determined by a rate case proceeding. There's lots of talk about energy affordability and rate increases right now, regionally as well as nationally. So that's sort of wanted to make sure that was connected here. So you can directly or formally intervene in those types of proceedings where you file comments, which are official records to the case, and the regulators or the utility commissioners who sit on the Public Utilities Commission, who sit on that body. They're the ones who are ultimately responsible for making decisions and issuing orders to the utility to do or not do certain things. So you are a direct party to those cases. You're a equal participant with every other intervener, and you can assert your opinion in sort of that official format. Sort of a step down from that, if you're not ready to take the plunge into direct intervention with legal representation, you can also do what's called a customer comment or consumer statement of position. Essentially, you could say all the same things you would say if you were a formal intervener, but you don't have to have a legal representation or sign off from an attorney to do that. That's something that SSDN has worked with a number of our members to do. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But there is a history of local governments around the region doing both the first two things on this list pretty frequently. You can also do, depending on the type of proceeding, you can do verbal public comment. So if you want to come before in a public hearing and give a 2 to 3 minute comment statement about your concerns as local governments, that's also an option. So those are sort of the things happening at the commissions. Outside of the commission, you can do things like directly engage with your electric utility. I know many of you are in touch with your customer representatives that are on staff with the utilities. That's a great place to start. You know, if you have plans to electrify your fleet and you want to think about advanced planning to install a pretty big charging installation at a specific city or county facility, you might want to call your utility pretty early in that planning process. So there's ways to engage around direct projects like that. And there's also ways to engage with your utility if they have a proposal or some kind of a program they're working on designing that's in the design phase, to get in front of your utility and sort of share, hey, we want to participate in this program, but in order for this to work for us as a government, here are the things we need. And that's something that local governments have done around the region as well. There's oftentimes too, I mentioned program design, there's stakeholder processes that happen around the design of utility programs. SSDN often participates in those sort of on behalf of our members, recognizing that utility stakeholder processes are sometimes time consuming. But if you're interested in hearing directly from the utility as they're working on designing a program or thinking through problem solving related to specific topics like energy efficiency, low income programs, affordability, things like that, there's often ongoing stakeholder engagement around that as well. And then finally, something that SSDN is directly equipped to help our members with, as well as connecting with experts and partners, is providing this capacity building for sustainability staff, leadership, attorneys, and anybody else in your local government structure that you think needs to be involved in these types of conversations. So if you're starting from ground zero, we can provide resources and information to help you better understand what these processes mean and how to get engaged with them and sort of how they fit within broader local constraints and conversations. So wanting to get specific too, you might be thinking, this is really, might be really hard and scary to do as an individual government. And I totally recognize that. So I wanted to provide some information or sort of raise the option of collective or coalition engagement. I think it's often easier to do things in a group if you're able to coordinate rather than being the first one to stick your neck out in this type of sort of high stakes environment. So I wanted to point to two examples that SSDN members have been coordinating on over the past couple of years in Georgia and North Carolina. So in Georgia, we have a group of our members who go by the name at the commission, the Georgia Coalition of Local Governments. They have directly, formally intervened in integrated resource plans and rate cases since 2022. And I will say this has been a really successful coalition model. There are other coalitions of local governments doing this type of engagement nationally. There's one out of Colorado, one out of Ohio. There's a couple such efforts, but I wanted to stay within the Southeastern context. And if you're interested in any of those other examples, I'm happy to connect offline. One thing that I think has made the Georgia Coalition really successful is the depth of relationship that members have with each other. So I think that's something that SSDN was able to facilitate, but our members know each other really well. They know each other's priorities, they understand and have really deep trust built with each other that enables them to keep coming back to the Public Service Commission in Georgia year after year whenever Georgia Power has a new IRP or a rate case. And the involvement of the coalition has resulted in things that would not have been included in the commission's final orders had the local governments not been there. So there's certain carve-outs for customer classes that include municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals, or MUSH customers. If you're from Georgia, you know that acronym. Carve-outs in certain utility offered programs for those customers. As initially proposed by Georgia Power, those customers would not have been eligible participants, but with the involvement and engagement of local governments, that is now available to those customers in Georgia. Also wanted to flag, so a sort of a step down from the formal intervention. Our Georgia members have done a lot of deep intervention in Public Service Commission proceedings, including cross-examining Georgia Power and other parties to the case. North Carolina local governments have been jointly commenting on integrated resource plan proceedings since 2020, with great success, kind of continuing to be able to come back to the table year after year. They've also done a lot of direct engagement with their electric utility, which is Duke Energy, as well as the public staff, which is the consumer advocate in North Carolina. So I've kind of talked a little bit about the benefits and drawbacks. Obviously, the formal intervention approach is pretty time consuming. It could be expensive, but you're an official party to the case. Joint comments are a little bit lower barrier to entry, but your comments are not an official record in the deliberations that the commission is making. So to wrap up, just wanted to flag these kind of 5 buckets to consider if you're thinking about engaging in Public Utilities Commission proceedings. I think an assessment of your internal time and capacity, how much time do you as the local government or the staff who would be engaged with this have to devote to this? And if you're an SSDN member, this is something that we can help fill some gaps around. Secondly, being cost. Is there technical support or legal representation you'll need? If so, those things sometimes come with a price tag, so that's something to consider. And then knowledge and expertise. This again is something SSDN can help fill if there's any knowledge gaps or things you want to understand better before you're ready to do this type of engagement. And then I would also encourage you to think about how this type of engagement aligns with your local priorities. If you've got a clean energy plan that says you want to do this type of work, that's a great start. But if there's other things happening locally that align with this type of engagement, that's great to know about. And then finally, buy-in. Do you have the buy-in from your leadership or anybody else who's an important decision maker to do this type of engagement? And if not, that's something you might want to think about doing before thinking about any of these other items. And I think that's all I've got. So I'll stop here and happy to take any questions from anybody in the chat or otherwise.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah.
Folks, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or come off mute. One question that did come up was I was thinking about the strategies that Ruthie mentioned on community engagement. How are you, Caitlin? How do you see those applied in policy work or changes?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room not only for local government engagement with these types of processes, but for community members to also get involved. And as I said, public service commissions are really they've gotten a lot more attention recently as we've heard more about energy affordability and sort of this crisis moment that a lot of our communities are in related to high energy costs and energy burden here in the Southeast. So I think for local governments and community organizations, finding alignment, like where there is opportunity to collectively share, if even if a community member or community organizations are not ready to do this type of work themselves, it is always helpful for if a local government is doing this type of engagement to speak directly about on the ground community based experiences that they can highlight as sort of illustrative examples. So I think continued dialogue between the government and the community is pretty critical here too. So local governments are ensuring that they're actually representing the needs of their communities in front of regulatory bodies. Ruthie, I saw you came off mute a second ago. Curious if you have anything you wanted to add to that.
Oh no, I mean, I just think that was all so interesting, Caitlin. And I'm thinking about our own, the Public Service Commission. Suddenly, everybody, at least in Atlanta, knew what it was
Right.
last year and what it did. And that was very exciting. Like there was just an enormous amount of resident engagement around those campaigns,
Yeah.
greater knowledge around why we should know
Yeah.
what the PSC does and why it's important to have resident advocates essentially on that commission rather than just kind of this ossified leadership. So there was just a really nice kind of like neighborhood level sharing
Yeah.
of information, which is really asset based, right? Neighbors talk to each other. So those campaigns really played on that, like that kind of
Yeah.
neighborhood level engagement. Yeah.
Yeah, I really love that Georgia specific example because that was really exciting I live in North Carolina, but watching that conversation evolve in Georgia was like I was like, no one's talking about the PSC like this ever. This is so exciting that regular people know what this means and why it's important to pay attention to. And I mentioned this yesterday as well, on our webinar we had in the afternoon. But I think the more we can speak in plain language about what happens at public service commissions, the better. Because, you know, if you are a formal intervener, you're going to have to speak some level of technical jargon just by nature of that type of involvement. But there is also an outside of the Public Service Commission opportunity to communicate more effectively about what this means for people's energy bills, what it means for everyone's everyday experience paying for electricity and being a utility customer. And the more we can do that and effectively message around affordability, I think we're much better served.
Yeah, thank you both for jumping in on that. And yeah, couldn't agree more that community insight and pulling in and knowing how to talk jargon and not jargon are so critical. But I see Mendy has their hand up. Let
Hi,
me Okay,
can you hear
go
me?
ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to piggyback off of what Caitlin. Oh, I don't have my camera going. I apologize for that. I don't know why it's not working. Nevertheless, I wanted to piggyback off of what Caitlin was said as one of the interveners with the Georgia group. I think that it's also important for us to be kind of a bridge between the PSC and our community members. It is a very technical and complicated process, and that's not by accident. and it's not something that's easily accessible to most residents in our communities. And I think it's important for us when we're intervening to be able to translate that down to something that's accessible for our residents and for our leadership in our communities as well, so that we can use our technical expertise to kind of make it more accessible in our own individual communities, because that's something that has traditionally not happened kind of by design.
Thanks, Mindy. Yeah. Ditto.
Yeah, thank you, Mindy, for jumping in and adding to that. And is very true. It kind of this actually piggyback off of that conversation too. Caitlin, I'm wondering what are some examples, or how can we make space for those traditional stakeholders and non-traditional stakeholders to really show up in this space, especially with the assets lens? If you can add more on that.
Yeah, I think that something that I think about with particularly for local governments thinking about engaging with their public service commissions, it seems like I've heard a lot of hesitation from folks just wondering if it's almost like, are we allowed to be here is kind of the question that is unsaid. As a utility customer, anyone is allowed to be there. So whether you're a local government, a business, an industrial customer, a community organization that represents residents, you are allowed to be there. So thinking about community assets, like there's really interesting, great power in that type of reframing. Like local governments represent pretty large chunks of utilities customer base. And if, that I think is the power of coalition or collective engagement, is saying, hey, we're here representing 45% of Georgia Power's customer base, or 30 whatever percent of Duke Energy's customer base. I'm making up numbers. That's not actually illustrative, but it makes up a pretty big chunk of customers that, if you were going at it alone, you might not have as much pull on a utility's attention, but collective engagement, I think, does sort of amplify or exponentiate the impact of the assets of multiple stakeholders coming together as one. And I think same thing for community engagement. That's not something that SSDN directly supports, but we work with a lot of partners who are more in touch with residents and directly on the ground community focused folks, and sort of teaching and equipping individuals to speak about what's happening at public service commissions in plain language, I think really equips community members with the tools to, educate their neighbors, share information. To Ruthie's point about that neighborhood-based campaign structure, like if people have the knowledge and the information, that is an asset that's pretty critical to encouraging more engagement, at least minimally more conversation, and spreading awareness about, this is a really important venue that's kind of flies under most people's radars unless you're paying attention to this on a daily basis. So the more we can, again, talk about this in plain language, share information, and equip people with that knowledge, I think we really harness the assets across communities.
Yeah, thank you so much. You summarized that really well. And appreciate Ruthie and Mindy jumping in as well here. And thank you for all the technical knowledge, because I think that, like you said, is critically the part that's missing, and then the conversations on how we continue to bring that into communities and talk about it, like you were all saying. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass it back to you, Gretchen.
Thanks, Sammy, and thanks. Yeah, thanks. Echoing the appreciation for all of the collective discussion here, and the emphasis on how we bridge these gaps too, is really a powerful one. So I really appreciate that. Okay, we're gonna move on to our third speaker. Ashley Perez is the Sustainability Project Manager in the Office of Sustainability and Resilience with the City of Orlando. In this role, she advances energy efficiency, clean energy, and green building initiatives and oversees the Building Energy and Water Efficiency Strategy, BUES. I'm not sure if that's the right way the way that you pronounce that acronym, Ashley, but you can clarify for us. But another new acronym for the group today. But and this is the city's benchmarking ordinance for more than 900 large commercial and multifamily buildings in Orlando. She holds degrees in communication studies and environmental policy and management from Florida International University. So happy to have you here, Ashley. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ashley. Can you all see my screen? Perfect. Thank you. So thank you, Gretchen and the SIA team for inviting me to be here today. I think the two presentations that came before were amazing, and I think it's a perfect tie-in to what I'm gonna talk about today. So we will be talking about our two energy initiatives, our BWES benchmarking ordinance and our energy savings program. So we're going to review a little bit of history, the ghost of BWES past, kind of like what we like to call it here in the office, as well as some of our collaborators and partners. And I'm also going to have a few movie references along the way, which hopefully you'll catch throughout the slides. Okay. So I wanted to start off with a few policy elements around the BWES ordinance. So this is an ordinance that requires all City of Orlando building owners with properties over 50,000 square feet to report their energy usage to us on a yearly basis. We are also within the city required to benchmark our own properties, so buildings over 10K. All of our benchmarking is done through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We currently have a transparency report that we post on our City of Orlando website at the end of every year. And buildings that participate and are passing are listed as participating, not participating are not in compliance. We do not have a fee associated with our ordinance, but we do have kind of these two buckets. So participating, not participating, and our transparency report. The last piece to our policy is our audit or retro commissioning requirement. So any building that receives an Energy Star score below a 50 would be required to either submit an energy audit to us, and they can work with our local utility, or they would have to pretty much go through the retro commissioning process and submit that documentation as well. So our audit trigger pretty much started 2020, and they would have 5 years from that date to submit their information. So this was a little bit on the policy. But jumping to kind of the ghost of BWES past and some historical background, during the creation of the city's first community action plan in 2013, the Greenworks Task Force, which we had back in the day, recommended that the City of Orlando pursues a building policy that aligns with other cities that were practicing best practices for forward-thinking cities. So New York, Boston, Seattle. 1 year later, January 2014, the city of Orlando was actually selected as one of 10 cities to join the City Energy Project. So this was an initiative focused on developing policies to drive energy efficiency. So we were the first 10. I tried to find like a updated map. All the way to the left was the first 10. Now we have so many other buildings that have passed either a benchmarking ordinance or a BPS. So thinking back, I'm like, wow, 2014 was kind of like paving the way to where we are now. This was pretty amazing to see. Some of our key partners and collaborators back in the day, so 2014, 2015, were USGBC, IMT, ASHRAE, just to name a few. So USGBC did host several workshops with our Greenworks team. And here we have a few pictures. So several workshops were hosted. So this was during the time of January 2014 through December 2016 when the ordinance was officially passed. So these stakeholder engagements and workshops brought together several stakeholders, including engineers, building owners, our utility company, and residents. I know we had a lot of feedback, a lot of poster boards, sticky notes, pictures that were taken on some of the feedback received. But all of this information we were able to collect, and we realized that several stakeholders had different areas of interest and some concerns. So this is some of the feedback that we received from some of our stakeholders regarding to the ordinance. So local engineers were interested in energy efficiency and audits, our university's operational savings, and our local community organizations, public health. Off the top of my head, so I've been within the office since 2023. One thing I can say, this reflects a lot based on what our benchmarking, pretty much the documentation that we receive. So for example, shout out to one of our colleges, Valencia College, one of the local colleges that we have here. This year, they actually submitted retro commissioning reports. One of the first buildings to submit retro commissioning reports, and this reflects to some of their feedback through local universities and colleges that they're interested in operational savings. So it was interesting to see some of their areas of interest during that kind of phase before the policy was implemented and that feedback received. So we did receive, this is some of the areas of interest, some of the positive. During our stakeholder engagement, we also received areas of concern that different stakeholders have. So I have a few listed here. A lot of people were worried about, one of the main things was mandatory benchmarking. We have different types of buildings. How are you going to compare that? Well, we're using Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which takes into consideration more than 80 types. How are we going to obtain all of this data? The City of Orlando works directly with their local, their municipal utility, OUC. We have had several meetings with them, even came up with an authorization form between the utility and our City of Orlando to make sure that the process continues to flow. We had concerns about the transparency report, that their scores will be displayed, but they weren't going to have a space to kind of explain why their numbers look like that. So we actually added a note section to our transparency report so that information can be displayed. So these are just a few of the areas of concern that we heard. So through this, kind of before the passing of the ordinance, we wanted to take in all of the feedback from our stakeholders, so engineers, building owners, and then make kind of our informed decisions based off of that feedback. So two of, I think, the most important things, most important parts of our policy, the score for 50 triggering the audit, we had that written as 75, but we received feedback that that was actually too stringent. So we actually lowered the score from 75 triggering the audit to 50, as well as taking into consideration, we started off with that 40 square footage and moved up to 50 based on the feedback that we received. So this is kind of our timeline for the ordinance itself. I won't go through year by year, but I'll highlight a few important notes. We started off, or we launched the ordinance in 2016, and we only had one part-time staff member that was hired in 2019 to actually run and manage this ordinance. So if you are thinking about passing a benchmarking ordinance, I recommend 100%, if you can, to have a full-time staff member there to manage and answer any questions that building owners may have. So 2023, this is when I was hired with the office, and we also launched a software known as the BEAM tool, Building Energy Analysis Manager, that helped us keep track of our compliance. Another thing to keep in mind here with that, before the software was launched, everything was run based off of Excel spreadsheets, which is crazy. So we've gone a long way. So I just wanted to share our timeline, and I will jump into where we are now. So where are we now? We do have I am the full-time employee now that manages the policy. We have 2 interns. We have constant building owner communication and partnerships. See, we did hire a Beam, which we are now able to send targeted weekly messaging, an online ticket system, which is amazing. And then these are some of the energy costs from 2019 through 2025. So we have seen a good amount of energy savings, energy costs from that baseline, which was 2019. Okay. So I did want to share next steps. So where are we now? We are looking at a BWES glow up, and hopefully you all got the movie reference that I did here. So we are hoping to kind of revamp our BWES program, collaborating with our GIS partnership, our GIS department. This is really, really big. And I think looking at collaborations within your own city and what you already have. So we're trying to work with our GIS department to see if we can create a dashboard that will show us, okay, if there was a building sold this year, either I'll get a notification or it will be flagged so that we can keep our building list for our BWES ordinance updated as much as we can. So those collaborations internally through your own city are super important because we didn't think about that until this year. So super, super excited to collaborate with our GIS department. We're also thinking about shifting our perspective when it comes to our compliance letters. So as of, I would say 2019 through last year, we've sent our compliance letters in plain City of Orlando white envelopes. This year, we are shifting to a 1-page bright green Greenworks envelope for our compliance letters. So we are hoping that this will actually help building owners actually see the envelope and want to open it. So just taking a different approach to how we're doing and sending our letters. We are also looking at our Energy Champions Award ceremony. This is something that we're launching this year. This will actually reward participating in high-performing buildings. So thinking about how can we use that carrot to let building owners know, okay, thank you, rewarding participation. This is why reporting is important, and kind of sharing all of this information. We are also launching our scorecards through the Beam platform that we can share with each building owner to show them this is where your Energy Star score is. These are some improvements you can make through time. Let's see. Okay. So now we are going to kind of transition from our benchmarking ordinance to our energy savings program. There is a bit of tie-in, which I would like to share. So we passed our benchmarking ordinance in 2016. We also did a little bit of BPS outreach and stakeholder engagement with our residents within City of Orlando. We talked about key partnership and collaboration. Kind of the ghost of BWES past, and our office also shared this story, which I think is important to share based off of all the stories that I've heard today. When we started this outreach, we submitted a request for proposal for one community organization. Through this process, we were excited. They were approved to join. Once we had that kickoff call, they shared, we were like, okay, these are the neighborhoods and the areas that you'll be targeting. They paused us and they said, well, these are the areas that we're used to. We are used to our Latinx population. We know that the Paramore area is predominantly Black African American. Do you have another organization that will be helping you with that? We accept and we approve moving forward, but we think that you need a different organization to help you with that community. So this was a place of reflection for our team. So we were able to pivot and bring on 2 community organizations to help us move this project forward and move these conversations forward. So this is where we did some community engagement, door knocking, phone calls. We also had sessions in person where child's care was covered. So there was someone, if you did have a child, they were taken care of during the session. And we received a lot of feedback. A lot of our residents were worried about being excluded. This is where we learned a lot of our energy efficiency programs are geared towards homeowners and not renters. There was a lot of distrust in the government and worry that just a lot of the programs weren't shared as much as they should have. So all of this information that we received, we brought it back to our office and we thought, okay, what have we learned along the way? One, City of Orlando has a goal to achieve 100% clean energy by 2050 citywide. How are we going to get there? We know our residents are going through these issues. This year, Mayor Buddy Dyer actually stated that for municipal buildings, he would get to that 100% clean energy before he leaves office in 2028. 62% of our residents are actually renters in the city of Orlando, and many struggle with their electric bills. So we took all of this feedback and we created our energy savings program. So for phase 1, we collaborated with the Homeless Services Network, who provided a list of some of the most vulnerable population of residents, a lot of them in the verge of homelessness. And we provided 3 plug-in technologies, which included heat pump water heaters, window AC units, and portable solar. And not only did we provide these plug-in technologies, but we also provided our energy efficiency baskets that include small items that can help residents save. During this pilot, we also partnered with our local utility who provided historical, pretty much utility usage for the year prior. And then once we launched the program, we were able to track energy savings with the help of our utility. So these are some of our key partners, and honestly, we wouldn't have done it without them. Homeless Services Network provided that list of residents for outreach. OUC provided the historical data. We also worked with Poder Latinx, the Desire Foundation, and Grassroots Impact to get a list of residents that may benefit from this project. For phase 1, here are some of the results. Several of our residents were able to save between $40 and $30 per month with the implementation of these plug-in technologies. I think one of the main pivotal points here, especially for Clear Lake, Shun is amazing. He did not know much about solar. Now he's super excited to share it with his friends, but we were able to help our residents save. For phase 2, some of our key collaborators, so we did receive funding through 4 routes to provide residents with 50 additional window AC units. In the Paramore area, right down the street from where we're located now, if you walk down the street to the store, most of the single-family homes have window AC units. So these are some of the quotes that we received from our residents. I think one story that continues to stick with me is a phone call I received from a mom that had 7 kids at home. Her central air was broken and she's been trying to save to get it fixed. We were able to provide a window AC unit for her and her family. This image that we have here on the right, we did a walkthrough to install a window AC unit. It was 82 degrees in one of our residents' home. Extremely hot for her to be living in that condition, especially in the state of Florida. And then for phase 3, wrapping up, we recently received funding. So we received a private and federal grant to help expand and help more residents. So these are some of the key collaborators. We also partnered, I think one of the main points, I know we've talked about community organizations, CBOs, but also looking within. We also have within the city of Orlando, Hispanic Office for Local Assistance that helps residents. We partnered with this office and they were able to bring a good amount of residents that we may not have been connected to if it were pretty much reaching out to them to get those residents on board and applying for the program as well. We have received 150 applications to date, and these are some of the residents that I continue to keep in mind because you can't forget their stories. Rodney and Virginia received portable solar. Virginia has a heart monitor. Rodney was using his oxygen machine. And just that community trust. We do have one neighborhood that we call the Sisterhood of the Traveling Water Heaters, because once one person applied for a water heater, we received a few calls for a few more. So just that government trust and continuing to help our residents save on their energy bills. So to wrap up, this is just a little bit on our funding and where we are now. So we started off with our CLEAP technical analysis, which pretty much this taught us that our induction cooktops, adding that to our program will also help residents save energy. We are now wrapping up our private funding and we'll be moving and pivoting towards our EECBG grant, where we'll be able to help so many more residents. So exciting. I'm excited to continue to work with our community organizations, look internally to the OLA office and other organizations that we can collaborate with to make sure that we get the residents who may benefit from our energy savings program. And this concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate you sharing with us today. If anyone has any questions, put in the chat. I know we are a little close on time, so the SIA team will stay on. But I think one curiosity that came up was around building out your staff, because capacity has come up in a few parts. Like, how did the funding to build out your team happen? And with this growth, are these employees dedicated to city staff or outside consultants for engagement? Was one question. And then there's one more if we have time, but I'll let Gretchen tell me if we do or don't after.
Yes, that's a really, really good question. And again, I would say, so I joined the team in 2023. So some of the answer I'm about to give is probably the BWES past, goes to BWES past. When the ordinance was passed, we had our part-time employee as well as Brittany, who is now our assistant director. She was a part of the team to help launch the BWES ordinance. So I think we did have a really good team that were putting together a plan to hire someone full-time to help manage the ordinance. So I guess recommendation on my end is if you're thinking about building a benchmarking ordinance, to kind of write that in before it's even passed, to make sure that you have that structure and the person and the software, because I think that's really important, and that you're fully equipped with everything that you need. But I do think that that was written into the plan, and they were like, okay, I think we definitely need a full-time person and a software um, to help us move this forward.
Awesome. I think we're close on time, right, Gretchen?
Yeah, do you want to
Okay.
do one more, and I'm just gonna share one last QR code at the very end, but uh,
Okay.
if we can squeeze it out, because I want to make the most of Ashley's time. That was great information, Ashley.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then we were wondering, what did outreach look like? Like, how did you engage the quantity and the breadth of stakeholders that you got to the table? That was the
For
last question.
BWES or energy savings?
I think for BWAS was what we were more curious about, but both, just any insight on how that stakeholder engagement and outreach happened.
So for BWES, I believe it was a lot of just invites to events, invites to community talks, and then bringing our building owners to the table, making sure that we have, um, specifically, for example, for energy savings, if we have residents coming in, they might have kids. So making sure we have a place for their kids to be while we have that discussion. So specifically for BWES, it would be a lot of inviting, okay, who is important? Who do we want to be a part of this conversation? And just connecting with them. We want to hear your opinion. We want to know what your concerns are so that we can pinpoint and have answers for you based on your questions. So that would be BWES. For energy savings, we work directly with our community partners, Homeless Services Network, Poder Latinx, Flyers, our commissioners. I will say that as well. We did have a few commissioners. I know one of our commissioners posted on their Facebook account. So social media, flyers, word of mouth was really big as well.
All right, I think we're at time, so we need to cut this off. I'm sorry to do that. And if you have further questions, I think Sammy shared some websites to be able to get in contact with all the speakers actually. And again, we'll be sharing this recording and slide decks and things on the BRESE website, so you'll have access to those. Just one, and I won't share another QR code because we will be sending you out an email asking for feedback. We really need your help kind of guiding the next step. The goal of BRESE Collaborative is to bridge gaps, is to give you the right resources, information, tools, is to connect all of us working in this field so that we can help one another move the needle. And we need your help kind of determining where the needs are. So we'll be sending out a follow-up email with links to the presentations and the survey. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey and let us know how we can help you. I want to extend a huge thank you to all of our speakers. So much gratitude for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And I'll look forward to sharing the recording out with everybody and continuing to, spread the word and share this great information beyond even today. So really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Happy Friday. Happy long weekend. And have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gretchen.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.